that's the thing about being a reporter. All this thing of objectivity, this is all crap. What journalists do is manipulate facts. That's what I did for a living.
Did you do that? You did that?
Yes, of course, we all do. The difference is between those of us who cared about the truth and those of us who cared about news, and it's not the same thing. And if you care about the truth, eventually you're going to run into problems.
Chris Hedges is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, activist, and best-selling author who spent nearly 2 decades as a foreign correspondent. 15 of those years he spent covering some of the most dangerous conflict zones in the world for the New York Times. As a vocal anti-capitalist, he's been a polarizing figure in the mainstream media, which doesn't really matter to him because he thinks mainstream media is full of shit.
Listen, don't take this the wrong way, but you sound like a left-wing nutbar.
If you want to discuss issues, that's fine, but, this sounds like Fox News, and I don't go on Fox News.
In his new book, Wages of Rebellion, Chris looks at how revolution has changed countries and society since the 17th century, and argues that America is next. He recently dropped by our new Vice office in Toronto to talk about why America is on the edge of revolt, and how that's maybe not such a bad thing.
So you're someone who's been shot at by drunk snipers. You've seen death squads in El Salvador. You've seen some pretty dark shit. Do you think that overly informs the way you look at the world?
I wouldn't say overly. I would say that I understand the dark side of human nature because of it. I know what human beings are capable of. I also know how societies disintegrate. I've seen them go down. It's not theoretical for me. So I look around. Because I covered the war in Yugoslavia, I can be in a supermarket and suddenly remember what it looked like when all the windows were smashed out and the shelves were empty and there was no electricity. And I think that's an asset because most people are unable to see the fragility of the structures around them and how easily they can collapse. I think people have lost faith across the political spectrum in neoliberalism. They're not buying it. Everything that neoliberalism and globalization supposedly was going to bring us is a lie. It has concentrated wealth into the hands of a global corporate oligarchic elite. It has pushed down wages. It has created chronic unemployment and underemployment. It has eviscerated the middle class. And it has not been a force, as it claims, for democratization. In fact, the opposite. It has been a force that has destroyed civil liberties. The lie is harder and harder to sustain because it's more palpable in the physical conditions around us. You drive through city after city in America, and it's just wasteland after wasteland. Our infrastructure is falling apart. We lie about unemployment figures. I think the LA Times a year or two ago ran a story saying real unemployment is probably about 17%. But even then, half of America, by official statistics, lives in poverty. That's 40,000 per household, which most economists argue is an unrealistic dividing line. But then you add the category of near poverty, which is another. You're pushing 2/3 of the country. Look, in the United States, we are seeing a rise of very frightening nihilistic violence. School shootings. I think we've had 26 law enforcement officials assassinated. Now, I'm not talking about like gun battles. I'm talking about assassinations.
Guys walking up with guns, shooting while they're parking their cars.
And these are very disturbing signs. And they are examples of people who, some of them obviously are psychotic and there are mental issues, but people are breaking down. You should read, Chomsky points this out, and he's right. Read Stacks. This is the guy who flew his Cessna into the IRS building in Austin, Texas. But you should read his manifesto, where he talks about living in a rundown project, everybody's eating dog food. That's real. And this kind of mania for hope that has infected even the left is a political pacifier. Everybody is kind of addicted to these happy thoughts, and that keeps us complacent.
So I've been reading Wages of Rebellion. I wanted to ask you, do you think a revolution could happen in North America?
Well, I hope so. It's all we have left. I think when you look at all of the ingredients that go into creating revolt, the ingredients are there. We are going to have to destroy the system of corporate power by non-cooperation, by obstruction, and by refusing to be fooled by these very clever political carnivals, Canada having just finished one, that cough up these ineffectual figures that are going to do nothing to reverse C-51, which is the very draconian security and surveillance bill, in some ways worse than the Patriot Act. You've got the tar sands. I mean, the Liberal Party is not going to touch that. And in the same way that Obama didn't touch security. It's up to us, and it means acts of sustained civil disobedience. We have a moral imperative to stand up, if not for ourselves, for those who come after. That one revolts finally not for what they can achieve, but for who it allows them to become. And that we can't use the word hope if we don't revolt. If we remain passive, then we are accepting the death sentence that's being handed to us by these corporate forces. There is no way in the American political system to vote against the interests of Goldman Sachs. You can't do it. And so that creates governmental paralysis, the inability on the part of the government to do anything but serve the needs of a tiny cabal, in this case, a corporate cabal.
In other words, people feel like the game is fixed.
But it is fixed. And it's not like they feel like the game is fixed, that they're beginning to know the game is fixed. And once they know the game is fixed, it becomes very dangerous. There are a lot of myths about revolution. They're driven by what Bakunin calls déclassé intellectuals, which is what the Occupy movement was. Highly educated white sons and daughters of the middle class who began to experience what people of color have been experiencing for decades. Unemployment, police repression, foreclosure, all that kind of stuff. And that's why the Occupy movement was an important and a seminal moment in modern history, because it, for the first time, fused those déclassé intellectuals with the underclass. I can only speak about Zuccotti, where I spent a fair bit of time. They lost control of the park. Once they put up individual tents, that's when you began sexual assaults came in, drugs came in. We have to remember they were heavily infiltrated.
By the government?
Oh, yeah. Heavily infiltrated.
You think FBI, CIA?
Completely. That's not even a question. Yeah. So, I mean, we have pictures of a few blocks away from Zuccotti, people dressed totally in black as Black Bloc getting out of the back of police vans. I mean, Occupy isn't over. It isn't over because because the state didn't respond rationally to the Occupy encampments. I mean, they closed it down by force. And a rational response would have been a forgiveness of student debt, a massive jobs program, especially targeted at people under the age of 25, a moratorium on foreclosures and bank repossession, and a rational healthcare system that isn't, allowing for-profit corporations to hold sick children hostage while their parents bankrupted themselves trying to save their sons or daughters. That would have been rational. They didn't respond rationally, which means that they're going to get blowback. I mean, people forget Rosa Parks got on that bus in *54. You didn't get the next freedom rides till '61. If the state doesn't respond, and it's not responding, then they're going to. This movement's going to continue. Revolt will continue. But it's always the state that determines the configurations of revolt. And the longer the state refuses to respond in a meaningful way, and the state is not responding, then they're going to get blowback. It's inevitable. There's a passage in Kissinger's memoirs, and no one should ever buy the book, where it's, I think, 1971, and there are tens of thousands of anti-war protesters surrounding the White House, which is what we have to get back to. And Nixon has taken empty city buses end to end and put them all around the White House to protect the White House. And he's looking out the window, wringing his hands, going, "Henry, they're going to break through the barricades and get us." And that's exactly where we want all people in power to be. That's our goal.